born in 1939 in Willow Spring, North Carolina. While attending North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State College, she joined the Army Student Nurse Program, which proved to be a launch pad for an incredible nursing and military career spanning 3 decades. She served as an officer in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps from 1961 to 1993, rose to the rank of Brigadier General in 1987, and served as Chief of the Army Nurse Corps from 1987 to 1991. Forever furthering her education, General Clara has earned an MS in Medical Surgical Nursing from the University of Minnesota, as well as a Master's in Military Arts and Sciences and a Diploma in Management Relations and Leadership from the Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. She's taught at the Medical Training Center at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and the Walter Reed Army Institute of Nursing in Washington, D.C., and has worked in supervisory roles at prestigious military academies in the U.S. and abroad. General Clara is a trailblazer and consummate leader. She was the first woman to earn a Master of Military Arts and Sciences from the Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, as well as the first woman in the Army to qualify for the Expert Medical Field Badge. She has received the Legion of Merit Award, the United States Army Distinguished Service Medal, and a Meritorious Service Medal, among many others. And in 2019, General Clara was inducted as a member of the U.S. Army Women's Hall of Fame. Upon retiring in 1993 after 34 years of service in the United States Army, General Clara founded Caring About People with Enthusiasm, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to helping students of modest means to complete their education. Today, we're talking with the General on the subject of leadership. General, thank you so much for being here and for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
So you've had a long and diverse career as both a nurse and in the military, and you've held many formal positions of leadership and are responsible for leading both people and organizations. But I'm wondering if we can spend some time sort of talking about your early years, discussing your life before you rose to the ranks, so to speak. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about informal examples you had of leadership when you were young.
Well, I suppose the informal ones were mostly what I knew about because I didn't know very much about the fact that I was leading. But I was always able to look at situations and make a decision about what I thought needed to happen as far as they were concerned for the best outcomes. And my sister was older, of course, than I was, and she would be relating to my father, talking about the issues that the children had, because we'd tell her all about those. And as a result of that, she talked to my dad, but I didn't think she used the right approach with my dad. So I told her one day, I said, Betty, I said, here's what I think we need to do in terms of talking to dad. He responds if you talk to him in this kind of way. And she said, well, if you think you can do it better than I can do it, then do it. I said, okay. And that's where I got started with it all. And it just seemed to flow to me after that in nursing school. Whenever we had situations that we needed to deal with, I seemed to be always somehow out front. I think it had a little bit to do with the fact that I talked a lot.
And you came from a large family, right?
Yes, I did. And I often have said that there's some problems with coming from a large family if you're poor, in that you don't always get everything that you want. But there are advantages that I found out later. And that was that whenever you leave, for example, for me, there were 10 of us in the family. So when I left home and went into the work world, I knew 12 people, you see? And I'd see how I'd talk about, oh, that person acts just like my sister used to behave. Now, what did I do in order to solve that problem? And it helped me many times in solving problems in the workplace.
That's so wonderful. I read in some of your past interviews too, you've told sort of vignettes about your mother, and she certainly sounds like a force. And she sounds like she had her own leadership style. And I was wondering as I read more if she influenced you in any way and sort of the way that you lead.
Yeah. Yes. Well, in many, many ways. As a matter of fact, she probably has influenced me more in my later years. In that my mother was not a very talkative person, and she never raised her voice too very often at all. She was very quietly spoken, and but whenever you she wanted you to do something, you got the message right away that you probably ought to be about doing what she said. And she graduated from the sixth grade, I tell people often. But I will tell you this, she probably had more common sense in her one finger than I have in my entire body. And I tell people until today, common sense is special, not common.
So, and you have spoken to a lot in many interviews about the subject of mentorship, and that seems to be something that's close to your heart. Do you have, sort of, when you look back on your life, mentors that stick out to you that served you along the way?
Oh, yes. I should say that whenever I got into mentorship, I didn't know that was what I was getting into until I started reading the literature later and we started talking about it a lot more. But I was, as a lieutenant, down in the career course, and the career course in the Army Nurse Corps is a course that you have to go to. At that time, it was 9 months long, and you had to go for the 9 month period in order to be able to go on to the senior ranks in the area. So if you got an opportunity to go to the career course, it meant that you were probably going to be a career officer in the nurse corps. I learned somewhere very early in my being in the work world that if you have a problem, you should never suffer in silence. I
Um,
learned that very quickly. And I always tell people if you have a problem, don't be quiet about it. Stand out on the street corner and say, "Hello, does anybody know I have a problem?" I said, "Somebody will come along and help you." So I thought that I should go and see the course director. So I went to see the course director and I told her I started to tell her about what was happening as far as my study habits were concerned and what was going on. And the fact that one of the senior captains in the course had come to me and told me that if my roommate flunked, it was my responsibility. And then she went on to tell me about what was going on as far as my studying with my good friend and what my roommate did whenever she came in. And I was looking a little puzzled. And she said, "What's the problem, Lieutenant?" I said, "Have you been peeking in my windows?" I said, "Because that's exactly what's been going on in my house, in my apartment." So she said, "No, Lieutenant, I've just lived a few years longer than you." I said, "Yes, ma'am," and went on. And she told me at that time, she said, "You are doing very well in this course." And she said, "We expected you to do well because you were picked especially to come to this course." She said, "And I expect that you will continue to do well. And you need to make sure that you get yourself out of this course and you're not responsible for anyone else." And she said, "And as a matter of fact, if you fail this course simply because you're trying to help other people get through it," she said, "I'll see to it that you never get any place in the Army." And after she said that to me, she said, "You keep your mouth shut, do your work, and I'll get you where you think you want to go." Now, that was the beginning of a mentoring session. I had been chosen, and I didn't find that out until much later. But it was the beginning of a session because from then on, she and I were in contact with one another. We were never assigned together at any place in the Army, but because she was always in positions above where I was going to be at that time, because I was a real junior officer and
Mhm.
she was a real senior officer at that period. But she sent me to go and interview for a position. And I went down there, and the people said, "You're not experienced enough to come and teach our trainees." She said, "This is what they told me," and I listened to everything the people told me, and I'd report back to her, and she said, "That's all right. We'll take care of that." And she took care of that, and I went down there and got assigned, and things turned out fairly well for a while. But she always kept up with me. I always found out what I was doing, and would tell me, "It's time for you to move. It's time for you to go this place." And I did exactly what I was told without question. And I've told many of my proteges over time that mentors are there to help you, and they come to have a personal relationship with you, and you need to listen to what it is that they have to say. Now, later on, when I got a little bit more experience, I would kind of spar with her every now and then about what I was doing and what I should be about. And she'd tell me, finally, before we got finished, she said, "Clara, that's the way it is. And if you don't like the way it is, you need to move on." I said, "I got it." But we had a very good relationship until she died a few years ago, and I was able to present a little eulogy at her funeral.
Oh,
Great
that's
gal.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're carrying forward the mentorship. I imagine you probably mentor a lot of people.
Yes, and that is one I believe of the greatest advantages of mentorship is that you're very willing to share yourself and your experiences with other people. And I've done that over time. I had a second mentor that taught me so much about being a chief nurse and how it is to and that is necessary to manage people being a chief nurse. And I talk a lot about why uh, Katie McGalloway, we always called her, she was an Irish woman, uh, was very important in my life because she was the one who set me on, as far as I am concerned, the correct course of nursing practice that I stay on until today. And today, by the way, is my 60th year in the practice of nursing this
Oh
year.
my gosh,
60 years.
congratulations. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank
I'm
you.
so excited to be here with you. That's so
Yeah.
exciting.
1961, I started on this course, and she was with me at my first assignment. I was an assistant chief nurse, and she was the chief. And she said, "Now listen, I'm going to leave you to run this hospital." She said, "Because I know all about how to run a hospital." She said, "At a nursing service." She said, "But you don't." She said, "So you go out there and you get the experience, and you do whatever you think needs to happen. And whenever you need me, you call me." And that's what I would do. I did that all of the time, had no problems with it. But she said, "First, let me tell you a little bit about nursing practice." She said, "Nursing, if it's done right, is very difficult work." And she said, because the business of taking care of people who are in pain and suffering is not only difficult for the person who has the pain and suffering, but it's also difficult for the people who have to take care of. She said, "Now, in order to be able to do nursing well, it is very important for you to uh, first decide if you want to do difficult work." She said, "And if you decide you don't want to do difficult work, then it were better that you leave the profession
Mm.
than to try and stay here because it's not going to get any better. It's going to be difficult because I've established that from the beginning." She said, "But if you decide that you want to do the difficult work of nursing and you sign on to do that," she said, "then don't bitch, don't gripe, don't badmouth the profession. Work well with your coworkers and get on with doing the business of nursing." And I will tell you, I listened to her that day, and I made a decision that I did want to do the difficult work of nursing. Now, I want to tell you, there were days whenever it was more difficult than others. And I really, really wanted to say something. But a still small voice in the back of my head would say, Clara, this is difficult work that you have to do. And you decided that you wanted to do difficult work. And therefore, don't bitch, don't gripe, don't badmouth your profession. Get on with doing the business of difficult work. And I will tell you, all of those gray hairs you see up there, I earned every one of them doing the difficult work of nursing. I purposely do not dye my hair because I want to remember, and I want other folk to remember, that there were some days that were very, very good, and there were some days that were not so good. But I survived it for 60 years doing the difficult work of nursing. And I will tell you, I'm very happy that I did.
That's a great story and good advice. Do you pass that on to your mentors?
I certainly do. That is one story I tell them all of the time. And as a matter of fact, I just got a letter about 5 days ago from one of my proteges who went on to be the dean of the School of Nursing
Oh,
in here in Virginia, and she sent me a copy of the letter that I sent her whenever I told her that I would take her on as a protege. She was in the Robert Wood Johnson program for leadership program for nurse executives, and she wanted me to be her mentor in that area. And I said, yes, I'll do it. I'll take care of that. And I did. And I said, now here are the things that I think you ought to do. And the Robert Wood Johnson people had some things they wanted her to do too. But I said, these are the things that I think we need to do and talk about. And we are still very good friends until today. And she did an outstanding job. But she sent me that letter and said, I was just looking through some of the papers that we went through when I was in the Robert Wood Johnson program. And she said, and I want to thank you again because you were very, very helpful to me during that period. And, it makes you feel good. And you know that when people are satisfied with what has happened to them and whenever they're being successful, that they will pass it on to other people whenever they has, and that's absolutely delightful for me.
yeah, the sort of like reverberation of all the lessons you've learned in life. It's like a riverbed. It's spreading into so many
Yeah,
other people and will continue to flow. That's amazing.
that's right. And that's really important for that to happen.
Yeah.
I was dealing with an organization. I belong to a mentoring organization here in the Washington D.C. area, and we have chapters all over the United States. But what we see now is that people who have been at certain chapters and did well now move to other chapters, and they do well over in those chapters. And so the word is getting around that if you get this person over here to help you, you'll do well. And yesterday, we had a meeting of all the chapters all over the world. And this includes Korea and Afghanistan and all
Wow.
those places wherever there are troops. And there were several people on the line who had been in various places that I knew about. And I was pointing it out for the folks there. And they said they're doing a great job every time they move to another area. And that does is delight me because that does help strengthen the organization
Hmm.
and strengthen the people.
Is mentorship a key part of leadership for you? I mean, they're little slightly different, but what you're describing sounds like a part of leadership.
Yes, it is. I think it is. I believe it is. I've always considered it a part of mine after General Leal, that was my first mentor, took me on all those years ago. She was a lieutenant colonel at the time. And when I talk to people about my first mentor and tell them about him, I said, listen now, things may happen to you later on if you pay attention. I said, because General Leal went on to be the first general that we had in the nurse corps, no, the second general that we had in the nurse corps. I said, and was very happy to follow her as the sixth person that got to be a general. Yeah, so
That's
that
so
worked out fine.
amazing.
Yes.
I
Well, tell me
wanted to, when I was reading about your life, which now I've done extensively, I'm a borderline stalker, so
that.
apologize. I came across this quote that Joseph Campbell has said before, and I mean, I immediately thought of you, and I'm going to read it. I want to know your thoughts, and you're an avid reader too, so I'm sure
Yes.
it will make sense. But he says, "You enter the forest at the darkest point where there is no path. Where there is a way or a path, it's someone else's path. And if you follow someone else's path, you will not realize your own potential." And when I thought of your life, when I've read what I've read and how it's unfolded from the beginning, there is no map for you. I mean, you made this map as you were walking it. And there are so many points in your life, I know from hearing you speak. You thought you were going this way, and then you went this way. And especially in the beginning, the story about you wanting to become, or go into law. And I'm hoping you'll
Yes.
share that
Yes.
because just when I think about the way that your life, the twists and turns, and the road that you've taken, it's definitely been forged in your own way. And I want to talk a little bit about that too, because I feel like you must have advice for other leaders kind of forging their path and in, trudging through the woods and figuring it out. So I guess I'm curious into what your thoughts, or if that resonates at all with you, that quote in your life.
Yeah, it does, and that quote is quite true. I think because and this is what I tell youngsters that I deal with quite often, and sometimes some oldsters too. That's changing from one profession to another, or changing from one area of the profession to another. I tell them two things. One is don't think that you are your best advisor about what you want to do because some other people may know it much better than you. And I will tell you, had I not listened to some other people tell me about where they thought I needed to go, I would not be where I am today because I had a whole different idea about what I needed to be about doing. And so I tell people to do that. Secondly, I tell them never to refuse jobs. Very often when people in a profession like nursing, because there are several avenues that you can take and
Mhm.
things that you can do there, very often they have a fixed idea about where they want to be, what they want to do, and that type of thing. That it can be an error. I will tell you, some people can send you to some places and things can work out such that you would be surprised. That so I always tell people keep an open mind and be real open about these jobs that you get. I never turn down jobs, and I never turn down jobs because I've never done it before. And if you haven't had a job, you haven't had the job before, how do you know you need to turn it down? You might get over and like it, you know. And so every place I go, when I was a head nurse, that was the best thing to do for me to do at that time. Whenever I got into education, oh, I absolutely love education. Didn't want to go anyplace else. They said, no, 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 no. You got to go over here and be a chief nurse. So I said, okay, send me over to be a chief nurse. So they sent me to be a chief nurse, and I went willingly. But I said under my breath, I'm going to do this a little differently whenever I get a chance. And I'm going back over there into education. I never really got back into education full time because I got over there with chief nursing and I found out there's a lot of opportunity to educate people here. And so that's what I did. And so that's what I was doing in those particular areas. And it was wonderful for me because I have had the opportunity to do many, many types of jobs, but not and go in many, many types of positions, but not because I decided. It was because somebody who looked at me and saw some uh, advantageous uh, value in what it was, and advantages and professional value in what it was that I was doing, that they were willing to send me to that place. And I went over there, and of course, I did my usual best I could with the situation, and it turned out fine.
That's so
I had
great.
a great time. Yeah.
I mean, Joseph Campbell also has another quote that he says, "You must give up the life you have planned to live the one that is waiting for you." And I mean, it sounds like what you're describing is some sort of healthy dose of humility and keeping your eyes open and being ready to say yes to the next thing that comes down the road.
Yes,
I
and
think-
to trust that people
Mhm.
will not steer you wrong.
Right.
You know? And I had faith in the folk who were sending me to these various places uh, before I went, and I trusted that they would not steer me in a direction that they were not sure that I'd be successful in. You know, but I learned very early in my career. Listen, when the world hands you lemons, you got to make lemonade.
That's such a great outlook to have.
And then sometimes you do get lemons. I will tell you.
Tell us how you got into nursing originally in the
Well,
beginning.
that's a story. That
I know
was
I love it.
that was from the beginning too. I was when I was 4 years old, my sister, my older sister, dear Betty, taught me how to read, and and so I found that I could read those little letters on those pages, and so I started reading magazines. And I got a hold of this magazine, and I saw this woman sitting on in the pedestal. I thought she was on a pedestal, but it was the high chair. And I said to my mom, I said, "Who is this person?" She said, "That's a judge." I said, "What do you have to do to be a judge?" She said, "Well, first you have to be a lawyer." I said, "That's it. I'm going to be sitting in that chair like that woman right there." and so, and at the same time, my father said, "Absolutely not." And my dad and I, more than any of the other children, had sparred about everything. He'd say, "No, you can't do that." And I'd say, "Why not?" And then he'd have to try to explain to me. And I think sometimes he laughed at me a lot because I was forever asking why not, and he said forever saying because I said so, and so we got no place for that. But anyway, anyway, I tell youngsters today we didn't have as many opportunities as we have these days in terms of getting money and and getting loans or whatever is necessary to get to where you need to be at some point. So as a result of that, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about how I was going to do this nursing business. Man, I still don't know until today how he knew about that nursing program because my dad graduated from third grade and he didn't know a lot about education and that type of thing, but he wanted all of his children to be educated. He and mother, that's something that they agreed on and they talk to us about all the time is that you need to get yourself educated in order to be able to change your plight in life. And so he said that there's a nursing school up there where your sister's going. And so you need to get ready to go into that school. And that's where my money's going. So I said, well, if that's where the money's going, I want a college education. And so that's where I'm going. And I went. And after I got there, I discovered something about me and wanting to be a lawyer and that type of thing. It was not so much the profession; it was that I needed a challenge. And I will tell you, nursing has been that challenge for me over the last 60 years. Indeed, I will tell. And I have tried to go to. I tried to law school after that period of time, and I was about mid-career at that time because I was a major, and I applied here at George Washington University here in D.C. And the dean of the School of Law at that time was a former military person. And I went down with all of my papers and everything to him to see if I could get accepted at the school. And he tore up my application right there in front of me. And he said, "Listen, Major, let me tell you something." He said, "I've looked at your record here." He said, "And I will tell you this." He said, "If you are not a general in the next 10 years, you come back to see me and I will pay for you to go to law school." I said, "Oh, that's nice." So He said, but otherwise, you go on and do what it is that you're about doing, because I was about to go to the first general's course, and he said, and I'll see you in 10 years. Well, I never got back to him in 10 years, because in 10 years I was a general, and
It's amazing.
it worked out well.
Had you ever had sort of doubts along the way in your career or in your pathway? Was there ever moments where you thought, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or am I having the biggest impact that I could have?
Yes, I've had some of those. Luckily, I have had a number of people, a lot of them mentors, but a number of friends who never let me go that route of
Mm.
saying that, and never let me stay in that doubt position for any period of time. And so I've been just blessed with those individuals who uh, sometimes, sometimes to my own detriment, would say, "Leave her alone. She's special. She's going to do fine, and don't get in her way." I had one guy who went to my same college, who used to go around the army, and he was in the army with me. But he tell me, "Who are you seeing these days? Who's your boyfriend?" And he'd see me with somebody. Don't you get in the way of that young person. I don't need this in my life. But I have really had a number of people who were around and willing to help me whenever I had those times. And I think those times are important to have sometimes in a career, because if you don't have those times, you'll never know how to feel on top.
Yeah,
So you got to go down sometimes so that you can know what it's like when you're up.
that's so true.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it that way, but that
Yeah.
is absolutely true.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
would your advice be to other like nursing leaders that are kind of forging their own path or finding their own path? Would it be to kind of sit there for a while in those spots, or to reach out to other people? What would you say to people that are sort of struggling with that right now?
Well, sometimes you can do either one. I'll
Mhm.
tell you. Sometimes it may be best, and you have to know yourself well enough to know it's best to go into a room or someplace and be quiet and still and listen to what your head says to you every now and then. I tell people, if I didn't listen to my intuition, I would never have made it this far.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Uh, and then there's other times when, especially if you have a good friend or a cabinet of people. And now I have about 6 people that I can call upon and say, and I say, these are the folks who do the sanity check for me, you
Mm.
know? And every now and then I need a sanity check, because maybe I'm going a little crazy and don't know it. And they have always been willing and helpful in putting me back on the right track so that I could keep going. Yeah.
Like your own board of advisors, sort of.
That's right. Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
like that. So you
I call them
surround
my kitty
yourself
cat.
with good people that way. Mhm.
Yes, yes, indeed.
It's interesting, like listening to you talk about your life. It sounds like you've always done that. I mean, even like you mentioned, putting your trust in other people to sort of direct you in the right way, and then you giving back so much from a mentor perspective and serving as that guidepost for other people. It really is so interesting to watch sort of just the network unfold of influence that you've been a part of for so long.
Yes, yeah. And I rather enjoy them. You see,
Yeah.
this pandemic is cramping my style tremendously. Because you can't get out and reach out to people, except for we've made that Zoom into an art form. I
Yeah.
mean, that really gets us out a lot. But touching and dealing with folks directly, it's pretty difficult to do. But I've done it all my life, and I do it as much as I can these days with the Zoom. Yeah.
Well, and that kind of leads me into another direction. I was thinking when I was, preparing for this around nursing, and I often hear nursing being described as sort of a calling, something that you are born to do, that you answer to do. And it's always around either caring for another person or caring for the patient in the bed, or it revolves around a real human connection,
Yeah.
and I wondered, there's so many nurses that are at the bedside that then leave the bedside to go and do tremendous things like you've done. And how do you keep sort of that connection with the patient in the bed, or how has that paradigm changed with you over time as you move in a different direction? But how do you stay close to that?
That's a great question. You're a great interviewer.
Thanks. I'm pulling the hard ones out.
You are. That's a tough question. But I can tell you, it was very, very difficult for me to leave the bedside.
Oh.
I would say very difficult. As a matter of fact, the first time I was asked, I really wanted to say no, but I had not been in the habit of saying no whenever someone said you need to take a new position. And so I said, no, I won't do this. I'll go ahead and do what was said. But I went to talk to my mentor, and I told her I was having trouble. By this time, she was retired, and I told her I was having difficulty. Well, she said, why are you having difficulty? I said, well, I'll tell you. One reason I'm having difficulty is I know that I'm a good bedside nurse. There is no doubt about that fact. And I just think that whenever I leave that bedside, that the patients that I would have taken care of would have lost, would have a tremendous loss because I'm not there.
Mhm.
But she said, now, wait a minute, Clara. She said, just think about that now. She said, as you are being a bedside nurse, she said, think about the fact that the only influence you have is with your two hands.
Oh,
She said, that's all you got. She said, and it never gets beyond that. And you never can do any more than what your two hands can master. She said, now, if you go into a position of administration where you are required to write policy and to try and implement that policy on a regular basis and explain it to the nurses that have to deal with it and see to it that they implement that policy, she said, you influence a lot more hands.
so true.
And I said, wow, I never thought about that. I had never thought about that before. But I said, she's absolutely right. Now, I don't know if she conned me.
No,
No,
I think that's
I,
beautifully
I
put.
think that's her wisdom. I think that was her wisdom. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't her wisdom, I've told enough other people about it in order to get them to do the same thing that I had to do. Because it does indeed require a very talented and dedicated nurse to leave that bedside and go out there to influence those other hands. But if you get out there and you get good at it, let me tell you, you'll have a chorus singing, humming, everybody all in the same direction. I used to tell the nurses, I was chief nurse over at Walter Reed, the largest facility in the Department of Defense, and I was chief nurse over there, and I used to tell them, listen, I had nurses from 250 different colleges and universities in the United States. I mean, and they don't always teach the same thing. And they don't always teach it in the same manner. But when you come together to become an Army nurse, at some point in time, whenever we got to get out there and do our work, there's got to be some harmony in there someplace. And so when we get around to everybody's got to put in there a little bit to make the harmonious sound. And so I used to tell them all the time, listen, come on, we got to get harmony over here today. And it was quite a challenge at Walter Reed, but we managed it. Certainly did. Make sure that those patients got taken care of.
Yeah, I imagine that there was a lot of moving pieces and parts around there.
Oh, yeah.
I like the metaphor you used around harmony, and that makes so much
Yeah,
sense when leading a group of people.
absolute, without a doubt. Yeah.
When we were preparing for this, we originally had another podcast scheduled, a week ago, and then the weather
Uh-huh.
had other plans, and the freezes started happening in the southeast, and so I had emailed you to see if we could reschedule, and I did not want to. I was really disappointed that we would have to reschedule because of the internet connection was unstable. And you wrote me back and said, Mullady, one thing I learned in the army was that if you're going to fight with nature, nature's always going to win. And I
Absolutely.
thought that was so funny and true. And it also made me start thinking about, as a leader, what battles you should pick and fight and which ones you shouldn't, and how to make those choices. Because again, I look at your life and career and I imagine that there's opportunities to, fight plenty of battles. And how do you know as a leader which ones to choose to pick and which ones not to? Because like I'm stubborn as anything. I would probably have still tried to do the podcast and got frustrated and it wouldn't have worked out and it would have been all for naught. I just don't have that wisdom yet. But how do you know?
Well, I'll tell you this. Um, you learn from 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 experience. I suppose I would say that. And some of the factors that you consider when you're talking about if I'm going to fight this battle or if I'm going to let it go or do I need to wait for another battle? Uh, I think one general put it fairly well one time. He said, "You must make a decision very quickly which hill you're willing to die on." Yeah.
I like that.
And one of the things that goes on as you are deciding if this is the battle that I'm going to the wall for, or if I can just let that one go, or give it a little bit of attention, but not a lot, and go on to the next thing. One of the things that you have to decide, I think, very quickly, and not very quickly, but in time to decide if you're going to fight the battle or not, is will it matter 100 years from today?
Mhm.
Right.
That puts it in perspective really quickly.
And telling you, if it's not going to matter tomorrow,
Yeah.
it is not even worth my time. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's the thing that you have to look at, and it's important for you to look at each and every time you get ready to deal with battles. Sometimes, though, as you're looking at battles too, you have to ask the question: is this my battle, or does it belong to somebody else?
Yeah,
I
I'm famous
remember,
for that
I
too.
remember that one very well. Whenever I had left chief nursing, retired from the nurse corps, and went on to deal with being a commander here at Fort Belvoir. And I will just tell you, uh, uh, I tell people very often that before I got into command, I used to do a little prayer every day and say, "Thank God I was a nurse first," because I'm telling you, you learn skills that you find out that you got to put together to deal with managing a base and managing people and doing all because you've been doing it all the time. But
Mhm.
I was over there this particular day trying to make a decision about what we were going to do with an issue that came up as far as the base was concerned that I didn't really think that I needed to be involved in. But as it turned out, uh, I did have to be involved in it, and so then I had to make some decisions as to what was going to go on as a result of that. And what it ended up being, and was that the fact that I had to, as a result of the revelations that came a bit later, I had to really move some people around and get some other folks going in different kinds of positions because they were uh, in a position to block what it is that I was doing and for no good reason.
Mm.
And so as a result of that, we had to do some different kinds of movements in order for that to work well. But you have to look at each situation and make a decision with dealing with it. I remember one time we were uh, dealing with a situation where a commander called me and said, "Hey, Clara, you have a memento on that base that belonged to the engineers because there was an engineer base, engineers home of the engineers here at Fort Belvoir before
Oh.
it became just a regular old base after that, and took care of base operations for a lot of other units. And the engineers had moved out to Fort Leavenworth, Missouri. And I said, well, if that memento belongs to you, then we'll see to it what is necessary in order for you to get it. Because I don't need to have anything here that belongs to somebody else. So I went and started talking to the engineers that were here. Well, the guy who had been the engineers, that had been the historian for the engineer school, said, "Ma'am, that memento that is over there by the chapel does not belong to the engineers. It was given to the base at Fort Belvoir. And so, therefore, we should not dig up that rock and send it some other place." So I said, "Oh, that's." I said, "There's a little conflict in there." And then I said, "Well," and this is something that you have to learn as a leader very quickly. Sometimes the best thing for you to do when you're trying to deal with the problem is go get a good night's sleep.
I'm
Things
sure
will
that's
look,
true.
let me tell you, things will look better in the morning.
I
Some
bet that's
days,
true.
because you're just banging your head against the wall, you're not getting any place. Go sleep. And that's what I did. I went and got me a good nap. And when I woke up the next morning, something said, "Why are you even bothering with this problem at all? There's a guy over there who's the chief of engineers who can resolve that problem for you." And I said, "Well, now, isn't that smart?" And he and I just so happened to have gone to a school together, so I knew he'd remember me. I called him up. I said, "Listen, by this time he's a 2 or 3 star, 3 star, I think it was." And I said, "Sir, here's the problem that I have." And he said, "Clara, you don't have a problem." He said, "That's my problem. I'll take care of it." I said, "Thank you very much." And he took care of that problem, found them folks another rock, and, and that one stayed where it is. And they went on out to Leonard Wood, and that was the end of that. But you have to get to the end of whether it is my problem or not. And sometimes it's not.
I
And
like that.
when it isn't, you need to give it to whomever it belongs to.
Yeah, that's kind of what you were talking about around the multiple hands, sort of how
Yeah,
to influence other people. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah, for
How do
sure.
you think other people would describe your leadership style?
Um, Most folks would say that it's probably eclectic
I like that.
in that it becomes whatever it needs to become for whatever situation I find myself in. And that's why I kind of keep it kind of flexible so that it'll go in that kind of way. Yeah.
I love that because to me that's a even higher form of leadership. It's
Yeah.
sort of like the enlightenment side where you realize, your leadership, your responsibility as a leader is really to adapt to the people you're leading and to be most effective.
Yep.
I really like that. I'm a social worker by trade, and so we have a similar phrase. You have to start where the patient is. You can't
Yep.
come in. You have to kind of meet them where they are to be able to
Yeah,
affect change. So I love
absolutely.
that.
And that's what I keep doing. Yeah.
And who doesn't like to be described as eclectic? That's a perfect adjective.
That's a great word.
Mhm.
When I found out what it meant, I said, "Oh yeah, I like that description."
um, I wanted to talk a little bit of too about sort of nursing leadership today and where it is because the nursing profession has evolved over the years and sort of evolved now to where they have a more visible or recognized seat at the leadership table. And it's about time, I'm sure we'd all agree.
Mm.
And I feel like the nursing paradigm, kind of harkening back to what we talked about around the patient in the bed, just sort of that patient centric point of view, has been something that's been missing in conversations around healthcare and et cetera. And I wondered what you thought about that, or if that is unique to sort of the nursing profession, or if it's something that the world needs right now.
What, that we are patient centric? Oh, that's
Yeah,
something.
like
Yeah, that's something the world still
humanizing.
needs. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I will tell you why and how come that the fact that if nurses are not there, it becomes very important.
Yes, please.
And this is the thing that I'm still going to have to work at and trying to convince people that's important to do. If you if you know that a particular profession is going to have to be responsible for seeing to your success in a particular facet of healthcare, then by all means have that person sitting in the room so that they can know what the guidance was from the beginning.
Mhm.
You see, when information has to be passed from this person to that person to that person, it does not come out as the same information as when you're sitting at the table listening to people tell you that this is what I expect of you in this situation. And that's the thing that nurses have been frustrated about very often. And I'm glad they're being more often invited to sit at the table in the beginning because we need to be there to hear what folks are going to have to say or going to say about what we need to do.
Mhm.
Because I will tell you, it's still the bulk of healthcare.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Certainly.
because taking care of those patients and looking at how they respond and obsessing how they respond to various kinds of care and treatment from various people in that setting is a very important thing to do. And
So,
since it is, we need to be there so that we can hear what it is that folk expect of us from the beginning.
yes, agreed. What do
Yeah.
you think needs to happen to get there, to make that happen, and to make other people have the same perspective on that?
Well, I think that we need to keep on educating them
Mhm.
as to what our role is in
Right.
this whole healthcare arena and make sure that they understand that. I have talked to nurses very often, and I tell them this to often too. You know, we come from a religious background. We had the nuns back there taking care of people, and all those folks who were religious. We finally got to the point where we got something called nursing. But I tell nurses often, you believe that if you do your job and you do it well, God will take care of you. I said, and God might. But I will tell you this, it will be done in the manner which you want it to be done if you are able to give a little bit of assistance by telling God where you stand in this whole situation. And one of the things that's important for us to do, and we haven't done as well as we should, is that we need to talk more to the people that are responsible for our being in practice. And those are the political people in this world. You know, the licenses of nurses and all other professionals in this world, social workers too, comes from a state legislature.
Yeah.
You have to know those people.
Right.
And you have to go and talk to them and you have to tell them about where you are and where you come from and where you need and what you need. And we are going to have to do some talking still because I'm looking at what's happening with this pandemic, and we still have a situation where we don't have a steady stream of nurses coming into the system all of the time. And that was my challenge when I was chief of the nurse corps, and it's still a challenge till today. If you keep a facility or a number of facilities in such a way that whenever you don't need as many nurses as you do, say, in a pandemic. You're able to draw down the number that you need. But if you need an overwhelming number, then you have a program that is in place always, and you can treat it just like an accordion. You can then put more air in and open it up. I often give the example of West Point. Did you ever hear West Point closing?
Mm-mm.
Because it never does. You don't always need 500 officers out of West Point. Sometimes you only need 200, but you never stop the school from running. When you need 200, you just go right down and close off some of those areas that you would have had to put those other 300 people in. And whenever you get back up to needing 500, because it may happen to you at any point in time, then you open it up. And that's because if you close the program, and I've gone through this in several times, it takes 7 years to get that program going again.
Yeah.
And you've lost a lot of time. And when you come to a place like a pandemic where we are now, you may never have them there in time. And then you start hearing a lot about burnout because people do get burnout.
Right.
You know, I tell people all the time, I don't believe in burnout. I still don't believe in burnout. But that does not mean that it doesn't happen to people. And I know it happens to people. And I had to, when I was chief of the nurse corps, had to work a lot in order to be able to get engineered standards so that we could tell the folks that gave us the money and dealt with us in the money how many people we needed in order to do the job they were asking us to do. And that's what's important for you to work out and to get going with folks so that you don't have this problem.
Right.
But we've got a problem right now, simply, and we're wearing people out, and physicians are having the same kind of problem. Although their reason is a little bit different than ours, but they're having the same kind of problem right now. That folk are absolutely having difficulties because of the fact that we just don't have enough numbers
Right.
right now.
Yeah, the pandemic has certainly highlighted the role of nursing and healthcare
Yeah,
and just how critical and how, central it is to
yeah.
delivering care,
And it's
both
been
to
there all
find
the
nurses
time.
and not. Right.
Yeah, and it's been there all the time. And it gets really blown out of proportion when you have something like a pandemic.
Right.
And they say, hey, where are the other nurses? Well, hello, they're not here. Remember you closed that school? But that's
That's
all
true.
right. I'm working in Virginia.
I know, and I hope that I hope that the pandemic has shed light on the general public, the people that
Yes,
don't work in healthcare around
yes,
nursing and the challenges in nursing and the importance of it. And, you know, there's been certainly a lot of terrible things. It's also hopefully shifted nursing to sort of general rhetoric, and maybe the average person who doesn't live in the healthcare space can start to understand how critical it is and how critical it is for everybody and for our country to invest in nursing more and to
yeah,
allow nurses to work at the top of their license. And
right.
there's been a lot of organizations like Nurses Everywhere, we've talked about that before, that have grown in the pandemic and that exist to sort of do exactly what you're talking about, bring it
Yes,
to the limelight, advocate for nursing. And so that's been one good thing that's come up, but it certainly took something terrible to make that happen.
yeah, yes,
I
absolutely.
hope that we continue as a country to realize the importance of nursing it and never go back to sort of pre-pandemic days where it was just ignored.
Yeah. Well, we're going to try and keep the focus on the legislature right now because that's where the money comes from. And that's where we've got to say to them, this is what you need to do so that we won't have that problem again. I think we're going to see some changes
I
in
hope
the area.
so.
Yeah.
hmm You brought up burnout, so I want to talk about that for a minute because that is a topic sort of, again, top of mind for a lot of nurses that have stepped up to the plate during this pandemic and working overtime. And I like your philosophy on burnout a lot. And what I like most about it is that it's empowering, to the individual. But I wonder if you could talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I tell people I don't believe in it, and I don't believe in it, but it does not mean doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
I know that it exists, and I know the extent to in many cases where I've had experience with it that I know it exists. And during this time, that is one of the things that's troubling as far as I am concerned with the practice. Is that we are running with a lot of people who are overworked and they realize that and there's a number of things that happen whenever you are headed towards that burnout position. One is that you start to not be able to deal with the uh, the job in in the manner in which you dealt with it before. You start to be dysfunctional at your work. Yeah, one of the things that goes on with. Other things is you tend to depersonalize things, and of course you have a different difficulty accomplishing the stuff that you may have been able to accomplish before. That becomes a real problem for nurses, and if that is allowed to go on for a long period of time, it will not be only a problem for individual nurses, but it'll be a problem with the whole group.
Hmm.
And so we have to try and do as much as we can to keep that from happening to a group of folk. Some of the things that we do is, of course, there's some basic things that I have dealt with nurses about, but it took a nurse to become the Surgeon General of the Army to finally get me into the fact that I didn't know about one particular area that, or I didn't deal with it very well. One particular area that is most important as you talk about burnout and dealing with it, and that is getting enough sleep.
Hmm.
Now I did at one time have a real problem with sleeping more than 4 to 6 hours a night.
Oh,
Probably more like four.
that's horrible.
That's what I did. But I grew up like that, see, all my life doing that business. And I was a workaholic, no doubt about it. And she came along and she said, "Ma'am, these are things that we have to deal with." And I've got the whole business of the nutrition down. I can do the nutrition. You got to take care of the nutrition. You got to do that well. And I can do the exercises. I got them all together. I do business all the time, and into Tai Chi. But I wasn't sleeping well. And sleep is probably the most important thing that you can do
Hmm.
to ward off burnout.
Hmm.
And so I'm pushing sleep these days. I'm
Oh,
pushing sleep
good.
these days, and it's important. And I get mine too. I will tell
Good.
you. I made sure I'm a little old lady these days, but I have to sleep. But I never thought about that too very much before. And sometimes whenever you work too much or you work too long and you haven't done everything that you should have done, it's kind of weighs on your shoulders.
Hmm.
I felt it. And I said, "Oh, that's what that was all about." Well, now that I learned how to sleep and do that, I don't have any problems with my shoulder. All works out fine. Okay. So yeah, and that's a serious area, and we've got to keep on working with that. And that's the reason how come I'm pushing this year that we've got to keep more people in the pipeline. We
Hmm.
didn't have enough. We only had enough folks, and see, people are trying to reduce costs and do all those kinds of
Right.
things, but they do it in the wrong areas. And when you start doing that with nurses, I'm telling you, it's one of those situations that will cost you in the long run in terms of patient costs and loss of life and that type of thing. And we don't, because you get into making more mistakes
Right.
whenever you don't have enough resilience from exercise and sleep and all of those things that are necessary to keep you going.
So you have a lot of good nuggets of advice for nursing leaders. One's get enough sleep.
Yeah,
Mhm. I picked up, make sure you have your own sort of personal board of advisors that can keep you on straight and narrow when you go off.
Your kitchen cabinet,
Yeah.
I call it.
And then also to make sure that you're sort of advocating for the profession as a whole and for the, person working next to you. And like you said, if you have a problem, stand in the street corner and scream it out loud and don't
Yeah,
ever suffer in silence. Those are all really good pieces of advice, especially now
yes,
for the nurses that are working.
yes. And learn who your legislators are and
Yeah.
talk to them. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they need to know what you do.
Right. Right. You're
Yeah,
right.
that's important in order to be able to allocate resources and do those things that are necessary. You got to talk to people who provide the money.
Yeah.
See?
That's also good advice.
Yeah.
When you sort of look back on your life, it's like hard to even put in words. When I think of like your timeline would be like down the street and sort of all the things you've done and all the milestones. Sort of, what are you hoping that people remember you by? What is your sort of lasting legacy that you're shooting for? I'm pulling out all the hard ones. Can't let you off
Yes, you
easy.
are. Yes, you are. And I can tell you're a social worker too. You know the hard question. I,
Important
I,
questions, you mean?
well, I will tell you this. There was a guy, and he and I were very good friends, and he's retired now, down in Georgia, down in Albany, Georgia. He was a surgeon that God taught me a whole lot about surgical nursing and stuff was going on. But he used to say, and I just kind of stole it from him, that I would like for people to say about me this more than anything else, and that was that I spend my time trying to leave the world a little bit better than I found.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Just a little bit better than I found it, and that would be enough for me. Don't remember all them places I went and did all because I was having fun doing all that
Mhm.
stuff I was doing. But did I leave it any better than I found?
Well, I think I know the answer to that. I've already
Uh,
spoken to enough people that would say undoubtedly yes. Is that part of what your organization is about now that you started? Tell us about that.
Okay, my organization these days is Cape Legacy Fund, caring about people with enthusiasm, Legacy Fund. And I had a protege. As a matter of fact, I still have him, but he's on over there running the YMCA right now and trying to get youngsters to do the things they need to do. But he was at that time the professor of military science and tactics at my alma mater. And he called me up one day and I was on active duty getting ready to retire. And he said, "Man, he said, I know that you all have to have a legacy at some point in your life." And he said, if you decide that you want to deal with your legacy, he said, I would hope that you would look at trying to help some of these students that have no way of getting funds whenever they need them. He said, we have a number of youngsters who try and go and work their way through college without getting into debt. And he said they borrowed from all the family members and
Mhm.
they have nobody else they can borrow from, but they need at the beginning of the semester about $500 to $1,000 to get them through the entire semester. He said if you have a legacy with that where you could provide a portion of those funds to those youngsters, he said then that would be helpful for them. So that's what I do. I go around and I collect monies, and I have two, three colleges that I deal with, and I go around to collect monies from people and from my own work. I do a bit with speaking engagements and things of this nature, and I put all of that money, books that I sell, I put all that money into this fund because I don't need any more for myself these days. I'm pretty well taken care of in terms of my retirement. And so I put that money there so that those youngsters, because my basic belief is that education is the one thing that is a standard that's going to keep us afloat as a nation and to keep us doing the things that's necessary in order to keep this nation in good shape. And so I want people, and I deal primarily with nurses because I don't think we'll ever be without the need for nurses. And I do it with military officers because as much as I would like to think at some point in time, we may be able to do without fighting wars. I'm not stupid enough to think it's going to be anytime soon, unfortunately. And so, since I know, I want those officers to know as much as they can about dealing in this business of serving in defense of your nation.
Yeah.
And so I deal with them also in these areas. These the youngsters that I have now, let me see, there's 7 that have come out in the past 3 years, and they are all now fully employed and going about their business doing various things. None of them came into the military, but I do work with a program that I started when I was on active duty of making sure, and see, this is the thing that I dealt with when I talk about making sure that we keep nurses in reserve. Before I left the military, I got the chief of staff of the Army to approve a program to put to make sure that we graduated 100 nurses every year to go into the regular force.
Oh, wow.
And he did, and he approved it, and I got 125 spaces, and we make sure that 100 of those nurses are ready to go on active duty every year. And those nurses absolutely love it, and they are happy because they usually come from the enlisted ranks, all of the enlisted ranks in the military, and they are happy to be able to go into the officer ranks because then they can get their children educated, and the thing keeps going on. But it works out very, very well for them. And they come and see me all of the time and say, ma'am, this is a great program. And I've been retired now 27 years, and so they keeping it going.
That is
Yeah,
so amazing.
working well. Yeah.
I'm listening to you talk. There's just so many sort of things that you've done that are just continuing to evolve and live on their own, and so many people you've influenced. I don't believe you that you're sleeping more than you said you were, because there's no way you can
Yeah.
accomplish all of those things.
Listen, my body tells me, my lady, these days that it is time for you to rest.
Good.
So I said that, so I don't fight it anymore. I just go ahead and do what I have to do.
Yeah, well, you've certainly earned it. So, like you said, putting in the hours and the gray hairs, you got it all.
Oh, yes, indeed. And, I was trying to wait till his hair would turn gray all over, but it won't do it. And so I said, well, whatever it is what it is. And so I just leave it out there.
Well, is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't touched on that you want everyone to know about?
Let's see, is there anything? I don't think so. I think we pretty well touched on everything. I just want to say one thing though in closing that I had and I mentioned the fact that this is my 60th year in the practice. I have gone back and said to my dad, "Thanks. This was what I should have done." So, and he would, if he were here, he'd say, "Yeah, I knew." so so I have never ever regretted that I decided to take on the profession and decided to be a nurse. And I still think that nurses in the position, with the exception of 1 year, they're in the position of being the most trusted people in America, most trusted professional in America. And I tell folks that always because it's important to say that. And because when you ask people, well, what do nurses do? Well, they ain't quite sure about that. And
Hmm.
they will tell you a few things here, a few things there. So they may not know what they do, but they trust them to do it.
That's so true.
And so they yeah, and
That's
that works out
absolutely
fine.
true.
Works out fine.
Mhm.
Yes. Indeed. Proud to be a part of that profession.
I know
Great
you
to talk to
are.
you today. Yes.
It's amazing talking to you, and I think I can say with confidence that you're proud to be a part of the profession, but you've changed it for sort of everybody that's come after. You've left it differently than you found it, like you said. So it's amazing to talk to you. I feel very privileged, and thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.